Hi, I'm attorney Renee Osipov, and I assist parents, guardians, and students who are having issues surrounding special education or 504 plan accommodations in the public school or charter school setting. In this video, I'm discussing a 504 plan through the eyes of a student. So what does it mean for a student to get a 504 plan? What do those accommodations look like to them? And how do they implement the accommodations that are provided to them? So starting back with the initial 504 plan, 504 plans are codified in federal statutes, specifically the Individuals with a Disability Act, Section 504. That's where it gets its name. In this federal statute, it gives protections to students who have disabilities and protects them from discrimination within the educational environment. So in order for a student to qualify for a 504 plan accommodations or 504 plan, they must have a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So this definition is pretty broad as opposed to the more strenuous requirements of an IEP. So if a student has any type of physical or mental impairment, which can be diagnosed by a healthcare provider, likely, sometimes a mental health therapist. It really just kind of depends on the situation. But once there is a diagnosis on the table, then you would look at the second part of the requirement, which it must substantially limit a major life activity. So that can really be anything within inside of the educational environment. So some examples, if there's a mental impairment of maybe ADHD or depression or anxiety, this may be limiting to students substantially with taking exams. So in that case, then 504 plan accommodations would be something that the students were allowed to take exams in a quiet area away from other students. The most common is that they're allowed to have extended time on exams. Sometimes exams are allowed to be read to them or they're given to the student in chunks, so just like one page at a time, because it can be overwhelming to just look at all of that work from the beginning. And so those are sort of the requirements of getting a 504 plan. Excuse me. So at that point, then the 504 plan team would meet and they would come up with accommodations. Now, we're speaking through the eyes of a student with a 504 plan. And actually, one thing that I think is overlooked a lot is that students are actually part of the team. Sometimes parents feel like they don't want them to be in on the meetings because it can be, it maybe upsets them or they feel self-conscious about their disability or their differences of other students. But however, they are an integral part of the team. And especially as students get older at middle school or high school level, they give great insight as to what they actually need in the classroom. And so they're a valued member actually of the team. So students are part of the team. They're part of writing those accommodations. Another thing that's great to have students a part of is if there's some type of accommodation that the student needs to clue in the teacher on. And so there needs to be sort of almost like a secret code. And let me give you an example of this. If a student has a diagnosis of anxiety and they're having anxiety attacks, the 504 plan may have an accommodation where if the child is feeling anxious or the onset of an anxiety attack, they can clue the teacher in and they are able to leave to go to a safe space to either regulate, get medication, or call mom or dad. But the important part that the student can offer is how they're going to clue the teacher in, because students don't want to be singled out, especially if they're already in an anxious state of mind. So they might have a great idea. This could look like handing the teacher a slip of paper. It could mean holding up certain number of fingers, or it could be expressing a code word. But having the student included on that and something that they feel comfortable with is really invaluable. And then that way, The teacher knows that the student is comfortable with it. They clue the teacher in, and they are able to leave and get those services that they need. So another important thing that students can do also is, they also can bring accommodations to the table. So if a child has a diagnosis of anxiety, especially around exams, a student's going to know more than just, they can speak more to the situation as opposed to just saying the child gets anxious when taking exams. If the student's a valued member of the team, the student might actually say, well, it's not just the exam itself, it's just the time frame. I don't feel like I can get done in time. Okay, great. So now we know that the student needs accommodation of additional time on the exam. That might not be the case for everyone. Sometimes students are anxious because of the size of the exam. So I used the example before of chunking. So the teacher can give half the exam to the student to complete first, maybe give them a break, and then they get the second half. But the students know what their sort of needs are, and they're a great resource as opposed to just having a bunch of adults thinking that they know the child better than the child themselves. So children are part of the team. They can help create the accommodations. They give great insight as well. And then the other part is that students need to use those accommodations. So a 504 plan and the accommodations are only going to work if the child is a participant in this. And so what do I mean? If the child may have some type of anxiety, which I said before, and they're feeling an onset of a panic attack, they have to initiate those accommodations. Sometimes accommodations are written where the teacher will check in, but most of the time in that sort of situation, the child has to self-advocate. So that's something that's really important and needs to be talked about, that the student really has to advocate for themselves. Also, open communication with parent and student is very important, because if a school is not complying with a 504 plan, the student is not getting those accommodations that they need, it's really important for the student to communicate that to the parents. Then the parents can put the school on notice that they're not complying, or the parents may even have to file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights to enforce that 504 plan. So students are a great way, again, to communicate what's actually happening in the classroom, because parents unfortunately just can't go to the school. That they don't know what's going on. They're hearing from the students. So just to sort of summarize the student's role, they are a valued member of the 504 plan team. They can suggest accommodations. They can express their needs so that the team themselves can also create accommodations that are nearly tailored. And the student can also communicate with parents in order to hold the school accountable if they're not getting the services or accommodations that are to be provided. If you'd like any further information on 504 plans, you can check out the link in this video, and it has our website on there and contact information, and we're more than happy to help. Thanks.